Well, quite a film. There's a longer version of that film. If you're able to stay afterward, you can watch the longer version of that film as well. A lot of important things said in there, a lot of inspiring people. You know, some of the folks, for me, some of those individuals who I knew about but didn't know their names, you know, the photos of the freedom riders who gave their life for something they believed in. Really important folks who were working to change this country to make other people's lives better. So we wanted to finish our gathering here in Memphis this week at this place and to talk about how we fit in. How does this movement of charter schools fit into this debate that has been going on for centuries? And for me, one of the things that I find fascinating and important to discuss is the issue of race and poverty in education and in charter schools. It's critical that we discuss it honestly, because too much of what I read about in education debates in this country uses those words as kind of crude hammers to hit other people on the other side with. And those words deserve a lot better treatment than that, than to be used in that fashion. So we wanted to finish by having some folks talk about their experiences who have worked in this effort to expand educational opportunities through charter schools, but not only through charter schools. And have done it in African American communities, in Latino communities. And to share with us, you know, what does this really mean? Let's get beyond the superficial rhetoric that we often read about in blogs and whatnot, and actually talk about what this means and how we should think about it and talk with each other about it and work on it. So I'm going to ask, I think, all three of you to come up right now. Lisa Keegan is going to moderate this discussion. Joining her are Gloria Romero, who is currently the head of DFER in California, former Senate president, I believe, or majority leader of the California State Senate. Real experience in these kinds of heated, difficult discussions in politics and communities around improving education. And then sitting next to her is Ken Campbell, currently the president of the Black Alliance for Educational Options, and formerly, not when I first got to know Ken, but when I had the privilege of doing a lot of work with him, most of the history, the young history, Ken's a young man, the young history of the growth of charter schools in Louisiana and New Orleans came about as Ken was the leader of that charter school office in the state of Louisiana. So he was there helping make that happen, and was there talking with folks in communities who were asking, why are you doing this? And people with very different emotions about whether they thought this should happen or not. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation and having us learn from you, from your experiences around our continuing quest to provide a better education to more children.
Thank you very much, Greg. And Reverend Kyles, thank you so much for being here. And that 10 minutes was more powerful than multiple hours I have spent anywhere in a long time. So thank you very much. I want to open just by sort of giving a little bit of brief background about this conversation, and we all come to this personally. I know we all have these histories in our own lives, what brought us to this movement and to this work, and I have to say that when I first decided to run for the legislature in Arizona, I shortly thereafter made a visit to Atlanta to go to see where Martin Luther King had lived. He was a huge influence on me as a young person. And for those of you who haven't had that opportunity, I went by myself and I went on purpose because I wanted to feel what that was like for him. And I was amazed at how comfortable his home and his neighborhood, and you hear so much about the battle, and I mean, he's a very young man doing everything that he did, but his home is so comfortable and beautiful, and his family they're educators, and the question I had walking away was, what makes you leave home like that and take on your own sometimes? I mean, change isn't, I'm going to go out there and all of my friends and family and everybody I grew up with is going to agree with me and it's going to be great. No, you leave home and you offend your own when you do these things. And I've never forgotten it. And when in Arizona in 1994, when we put our charter school law together, lots of things get said about movements in the past, and this is almost 20 years ago now, and I'm always tickled to hear what Arizona did when that's not what they did. Arizona's public charter school movement came about and the law passed because of the Hispanic Community Forum in Arizona. A couple of twins named Armando and Fernando Reese, who are very good friends to this day and have one of the only A schools in the middle of South Phoenix called Espiritu. It's a public charter school. The Hispanic Community Forum said, listen, we had a whole series of reforms, but what they wanted more than anything was when we created the first state board for charter schools in the country, they wanted 3 out of the seats to be delegated to low-income family members, people who represented low-income communities, because they said a governor isn't going to know us personally, and our schools are the schools that are most needed. And few people remember that that was in the law. Didn't stay in the law very long. But it was in the law in 1994, and indeed the first schools that got started in Arizona, which have been highly criticized, and for good reason, a lot of them, these were organizations that hadn't had a lot of business experience, hadn't had that opportunity because they didn't grow up in wealth, but they were trying to save their children. And I defend that to this day. That they learned and they got that experience. And schools like Espiritu, which is now an A school, started out horribly. No business background, no friends at a bank. They just didn't grow up in the same club together where they talked about, you know, financial mechanisms all the time. It just wasn't their life. Armando and Fernando. They lived in South Phoenix with people that they were bound and determined to empower. And so I just set that up as a background. These two people come to this work with their own amazing stories, and you have their written biographies, and I will just tell you that personally I have been inspired by both of these people on regular occasions. Gloria was the first woman to take on leadership in her party in California. I am a big fan of chick power, so I love that wherever it happens. And Ken and the Black Alliance have changed the dialogue for what leadership in America looks like. So I'm going to just start by having you guys kind of set the table for why you came to this work and how people ought to hear you thinking about this. So Gloria, why don't you start? Chicks still get to go first.
Okay, thank you so very much. And I've just got to say that I've spent hours in this museum. I mean, this is more than a museum, it's a living trust to history and to the promise. But I will tell you, Reverend Kyles, I mean, to be here today and to stand next to you, a witness to history, a witness to the promise. I mean, my heart is still beating in uncontrollable ways. So thank you, Reverend, for still standing up and testifying. I think for most of us, many of us leaving the hotel, coming on buses, walking to the museum, you begin to hear the silence as we walk through the front doors. And really, it's like a portal of time. And I think when we come to the museum, each time you come, I think it's the same sensation. I think today, though, for all of us across the nation as we gather here on the birthday of your daughter, it's a birthday for all of us in the parental choice movement. And I think, though, that there are questions that we bring with us, and this conversation today is about the conversation and maybe thinking about some answers that we may walk away with, but always, again, too, it's always the next question that's asked. And I think for me, as I got off that bus and walked through the front door again, I question, as we gather today, are we going back to Plessy or are we coming forward to Brown? Because I think those are the questions of our movement. And I think both of those questions are legitimate and provocative, soul-searching issues. I want to go towards Brown. I want to move beyond Brown, because I also think, too, part of what we've discovered is it's not just equality, it's equity, it's adequacy. And where do we begin to find that? Just a couple of pointers before I pause is that, I come from California. I'm from Los Angeles. I wrote the nation's first parent trigger law, which gave parents real rights to transform and turn around not just low-performing schools, failing schools. In California, we find over 25% of teachers in classrooms critical courses like math, science, special education, teachers without certification. And they're teaching in high-poverty minority schools. We find in California today our schools are more segregated than they were when we saw the Civil Rights Act passed. We find just a study being released today in California that in the 20 largest school districts in California, we find big gaps in salary of teachers. And that raises the whole question of certification and quality and teacher effectiveness. So I think as we gather today, there are lots of issues about looking at Plessy and Brown and what does it mean amidst the charges of creaming, amidst the charges of authorizers, and as we find, especially, understandably, black and brown and poor parents saying, I want to get into a system that begins to deal with equity and adequacy and efficacy so that my kids too can succeed. So I look forward to the conversation as my heart continues to thump, and I look forward to working with all of you today. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Okay, so I was born and raised in Biloxi, Mississippi, and my mom taught me that I had to have a whole lot of manners. So chick power rules today. I'm very cool with
Ken
that.
handed me his hanky today, a true gentleman, when the Reverend was speaking.
So I appreciate it. Reverend Kyles, I am humbled to be here. This is my first time being here. The first thing I did was to take a picture and send it to my wife and text my boss, Howard Fuller, who a lot of people know. And I said, dude, this is my first time being here, and I'm just blown away. But the thing that's so, I just think, in line with this conversation today is we've heard a lot about freedom. And Bayo, I think more than anything else, believes that educational freedom for our parents, low-income, working-class parents, is one of the most important things that we can try to work on. Because at the end of the day, we cannot live in an America where only certain people choose where and how their children are educated, where the state decides based on your zip code, based on where you live, that this is the education that is good enough for you. And we can't, in my mind, have that type of society. When Lisa asked why we're here, why I'm at this work, when I was in Washington, D.C. in the mid-1990s, and some people like Joe Baker will probably remember this, but we had just changed our superintendent again. And this was the day that General Becton was announced as the superintendent of D.C. public schools. And I remember him saying very clearly and articulating something that became kind of a slogan for a while: failure is not an option. So he lasted about 2-3 years, maybe not even that long, because he was out fast. But anyway, that day, for a lot of us who were working on education stuff, was a very important day. We celebrated that day because we felt that now we have somebody in charge of this system that's going to make a difference for kids. And so we were in, kind of the celebratory mode. And that afternoon, I was in my office, just kind of joking around. And I remember my boss came in and they said, there's a parent here. I want you to come in so we can talk to this parent. And it was a parent who came in that day. And at the time, I had never thought about parent choice. I had never thought about educational freedom. But that lady said that day, sitting across our table, that how was this general going to help her child who was in 7th grade with his new 3 or 5 year plan? And she was looking to us to have some kind of answers because we were out, we were doing reports, we were very well known. And I could just remember my boss kind of stammering and trying to make it through the conversation somehow and give this lady some satisfaction. But it was clear that there was none, that we couldn't give her any, and that General Becton couldn't give her any either, because her son was so far along in the system that they weren't going to make any changes that was going to affect that child. I didn't know it at the time, but when I look back at it now, that's the day that I realized how important it was to make sure that every parent has a quality educational option. There's a choice that they can make, and it's not a choice that they make in 3 years or 5 years. It's a choice that they need to make today. I kind of moved from the parents just stay there and suck it up crowd until we fix it, to the mode that says, you know what, we got to do whatever we can to get these kids in a good situation today. So that's what our organization has been doing for the past 13 years. Proud and humbled to be able to lead it and a great group of people, and look forward to the conversation.